This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode I chat with the world's best writers about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Today I am chatting to Chen for the second and final part of our conversation. Last week we spoke about Sweet Side Motel, Chen's writing routine, and inverting Gothic novel expectations. And today we are diving deep into her brand new novel, Slasher Summer. But before we get to that, a quick advert break.
House of Bad Memories, the debut novel from Michael David Wilson, is out now via Cemetery Gates Media. Denny just wants to be the world's best dad to his baby daughter, but things get messy when he starts hallucinating his estranged, abusive stepfather Frank. Then Frank winds up dead, and Denny is held hostage by his junkie half-sister, who demands he uncovers the cause of her father's death. Will Denny defeat his demons, or be perpetually tortured for refusing to answer impossible questions? Clay McLeod Chapman says, House of Bad Memories hits so hard, you'll spit teeth out once you're done reading it. House of Bad Memories by Michael David Wilson, available now in paperback, ebook, and audio.
From the host of This is Horror Podcast comes a dark thriller of obsession, paranoia, and voyeurism. After relocating to a small coastal town, Brian discovers a hole that gazes into his neighbor's bedroom. Every night she dances and he peeps. Same song, same time, same wild and mesmerizing dance. But soon Brian suspects he's not the only one watching, and she's not the only one being watched. They're watching is The Wicker Man meets Body Double with a splash of Suspiria. They're Watching by Michael David Wilson and Bob Pastorella is available from thisishorror.co.uk, Amazon, and wherever good books are sold.
Okay, with that said, here it is. It is E.L. Chen on This is Horror. So let's talk about Slasher Summer. And to begin with, what was your why for writing the book?
This is where I have to confess that it wasn't like I was hit by a bolt of inspiration and it was like, I have to write this book. I have to get it out of me. The origin story is, it was pretty prosaic because I was between projects, and it was my agent who thought I would be interested in writing a slasher because I had touched on final girl mythology in One of Us Is Already Dead. And at first I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I have a slasher in me. I'm not Stephen Graham Jones. I'm not Brian McCauley. But the more I thought about it and thought about what I would want to see in a slasher, and the kinds of slasher movies I love are the ones that are, self-aware and a little comical, like Scream and The Blackening and Freaky. And so I just made like a whole bunch of notes. And the next thing you know, I had like 20 pages of notes. So it was like, okay, I guess I'm doing this. So that's really how it came about. And really sort of my guiding principle was that, I really just wanted to write a fun slasher movie that I would want to watch. And that's like the kind of experience that, that I hope readers have as well as they're reading the book.
And before we go deep into it, I suppose it would be useful just to give people a quick elevator pitch.
Okay, so Slasher Summer is, hang on, just got the book here. Right there, that's the US cover. So Slasher Summer is basically Breakfast Club meets Scream. So we have 7 friends who were once members of their high school horror film club. So they're reuniting at a remote cabin, because of course it always happens at a remote cabin, where a cult slasher movie was once filmed. and they find themselves targeted by someone dressing up like the iconic killer from that movie.
Yeah, and I think because it is so referential to other slashers, I mean, there's something almost Scary Movie or The Cabin in the Woods about it. And this book is so self-aware in terms of what it's doing. So I imagine the 20 pages of notes that you made initially might have gone some way into forming this.
A little bit. It was sort of, notes on characters and notes on sort of the world that the book inhabits. But yeah, also notes on, gags I could do or little references I could sneak in. At some point, this has to happen. Just because we've seen it in a movie like a million times, but, can I subvert it a little bit, just to make it funny, right? And yeah, so it was, once I had that all together, it was like, okay, now I have to write this just because it would be so much fun to write. And hopefully people would have just as much fun reading it.
And so I want to know too, what was the first slasher movie that you watched and what was that experience like?
So the first slasher movie I ever saw was Nightmare on Elm Street. I was probably around 9 years old. I think I was maybe in grade 4 or 5 at the time. It was at a classmate's birthday party. And I think she wanted to watch it because that cute guy from 21 Jump Street was in it. I'm kind of, as I said, I'm a child of the 80s. So, and it was just, for me, it was a shock because my TV watching up to that point had been very, very sheltered. My mom didn't let me watch cartoons, except Disney, because she thought they were too violent. I mean, I watched them anyway when she wasn't home, but, this is the kind of environment I grew up in, right? There was no, I hear and read like so many interviews with horror writers where they were like, oh, my mom took me to the Blockbuster and just let me rent anything I wanted. Right? There was none of that for me. It was very, very sheltered. And so Nightmare on Elm Street, like the set pieces are just like so, like they're so visceral, they're so shocking, right? The bed with the fountain of blood and the girl getting like cut up and she's like, crawling across the ceiling like on her back. Like it was like, that was pretty shocking. Like I had nightmares for weeks after that. And then the very concept of Freddy Krueger, right? Someone who can kill you in your dreams. It was just, absolutely terrifying. And so that did not make me a slasher movie convert. Again, like so many, I hear and read all these interviews with horror writers who are like, I saw my first slasher and I was 9 years old and it made me a fan for life. For me, it like turned me off slashers for like a good, 20 years just because it was so shocking and so scary for me. And I only really got I got into slashers maybe about 8 or 9 years ago. So I'm actually quite a recent convert. Because even though I do things, like things that are spooky and macabre, I don't like gore. And I still don't like gore. I have to, cover my eyes during like really graphic and gory parts. And so because of that, for the longest time, I thought I didn't like slashers. But, 8 or 9 years ago when I realized that, I probably am a horror author after all and not fantasy, I realized that I had to broaden my horror education. And so I started watching more of the classic slashers. And I realized that, for me, in order to like slashers, I really needed to watch more of them because I have a kind of brain that loves patterns. It loves patterns and tropes and archetypes. I read way too much Joseph Campbell when I was younger. Joseph Campbell, Hero of a Thousand Faces, Power of Myth. These days, it's acknowledged that he's very much like a man of his time. But back then, it was sort of mind blowing for me because he really validated everything that I'd noticed about the stories and fairy tales and folk tales that I was reading when I was a kid. Like he validated that everything that I noticed that certain stories and character types keep repeating themselves. And so watching all these slashers and realizing, being drawn to the archetype of the final girl, and realizing that, the final girl is really sort of a variation on the hero's journey, where you've got a character, the sort of innocent, ordinary person who is forced into a situation in which they have to find their inner strength. And so just, seeing this pattern repeat itself, I think was just, very appealing for me. And that's the moment in which, I fell in love with slashers. I also think it's not a total coincidence that I had, I'd also just gotten divorced. So I think, the appeal of watching a woman, get through a traumatic experience, I think was probably quite appealing to me. But it's hard to say whether that's causal or a correlation, just because, all of a sudden, I actually did have time to watch movies that I wanted to watch. So, let's see. But I mean, that's sort of, I guess that's the story of my sort of love affair with slashers.
Yeah, there's an enormous amount of directions that I now want to go. But I mean, in terms of this 9th birthday party, we're incredibly young for, the host to decide, right, we're watching A Nightmare on Elm Street. So was this... Go on.
Oh, just because Johnny Depp was in it. And to be honest, I don't think my classmates, I don't think they were as shocked or scared as I was. They were, I think they were busy talking, and they were more interested in the kissing scenes between, Johnny Depp and his girlfriend. So I think I was the only one who was absolutely horrified by what I was watching.
And after watching it, did you tell your parents that you'd watched it? Or did you think, if you do that, you're in trouble? It's like, why didn't you run out of the house? Why? And did this affect what you watched going forward? I mean, you said, you were terrified. You didn't love it. You didn't go and seek out more. But I wonder if your parents at least were like, well, she can probably watch any cartoon at this point. She's seen A Nightmare on Elm Street.
No, I did not tell them, because I guess I don't think it really came up. But the other thing too is, this sort of feeling that if I told them, then they would probably never let me go to another birthday party again, right? Where they don't have control over the media that I consume. Yeah, but I mean, even though it was kind of terrifying, I was still watching, I guess, things that were kind of scary and intense on TV, just not things that were so graphic. As a kid around that age, my favorite TV show was Doctor Who. This is old school Doctor Who we're talking about, because again, I'm a child of the 80s. And, a lot of those old story arcs, especially with the Fourth Doctor, they're almost set up like slasher movies, right? Where the Doctor and his companion end up on some remote outpost or space station or spaceship where people have been mysteriously dying one by one, and very often there's only one survivor, other than the Doctor and his companion. And those shows were pretty scary. They were very much monster of the week stories. The Daleks, the Daleks are terrifying. But there isn't a lot of blood. It's not graphic. So I was still kind of exposed to that sort of, those sort of very intense stories. I also watched a lot of Hitchcock movies, actually, when I was a kid, because they were on TV. And I was very much into classic movies. I didn't see The Birds or Psycho until I was older, but even just movies like Vertigo, right? Vertigo is actually one of my top favorite movie of all time. It is very intense. It is very psychological. So I wouldn't say the horrors of Nightmare on Elm Street. I think it turned me off the graphic stuff, but I was still sort of interested in the very, that very sort of intense watching experience.
I'm glad that you were able to watch sci-fi like Doctor Who and to watch Hitchcock as well. And in many ways, I mean, they have a lot of the fundamental blocks of horror storytelling, but it's just the window dressing, or it's just that the gore isn't quite, there. So it's interesting how as a society we'll often let our kids watch sci-fi, but we won't let them watch horror, and there's a thin line between the two.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially like those old Doctor Who episodes.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think there's one story arc called, The Robots of Death. I mean, the fact that it's called Robots of Death, right? And it's just, I don't know if you've seen it, but like, these robots have, their blank metallic faces in this very sort of, I don't know, French courtly style. Like they were pretty terrifying. It was like nightmare stuff, but because there isn't like a lot of blood and gore, it's still, PG friendly, I guess. So.
Yeah, there's certainly more of a rawness to the older Doctor Who's as opposed to the more modern iteration, which I suppose started with Christopher Eccleston.
Definitely.
But still entertaining nonetheless. But yeah, the old Doctor Who, that's the good shit. That's where it's at. And I wonder too, because you mentioned both Brian Macaulay and Stephen Graham Jones. So when did reading them come into your slasher education? And was there anything that you took from either of them, or anything that you bore in mind while writing Slasher Summer?
Yeah, so I definitely have read, My Heart is a Chainsaw, which is, very, it's a great book, a brilliant book. But I think what I took away from it is that Stephen Graham Jones knows way more about slashers than I do or ever will. But Brian Macaulay actually, when I started writing Slasher Summer, I did read a whole bunch of slasher books just to get the idea of, okay, like how do I translate something that's that's very cinematic, a cinematic genre? How do I translate to the page? And so one of the books I read was Brian Macaulay's Candy Cane Kills. It's a novella put out by Shortwave, I think.
Yeah,
and that for me was, I learned a lot from that book, because I realized that, to make a really effective slasher, it all comes down to character, right? That your characters, even if they're unlikable, they have to want things. They need goals, just so that, it makes, it raises the stakes, that even, in Candy Cane Kills, like even characters who don't have a lot of, page time, who are just sort of minor characters who are just there to get killed, right, in the first chapter. You really get inside their heads, and you see that they, there are things that they want, there are things that they're hoping, they have hopes and dreams, and then, it all, they end up dying, of course, which makes, I think, it makes the stakes higher when, they're running from the killer, and it makes their death like those a bit more impactful when they happen. So I really learned a lot from that book, and tried to apply what I learned to Slasher Summer.
And I imagine too, both from having read it and seen how tightly put together all the elements are, and from just hearing you talk about other aspects of your life, I have to believe this was planned rather than pantsed. And so I'm wondering, well, first of all, if I'm right, and secondly, what that planning process looked like.
So as a writer, I'm an outliner. I outline within an inch of my life. Again, because I have so little time to write, or I write in like very, very sort of short installments of time. I need to be able to hit the ground running. I need to know what I'm doing when I start writing. So I need an outline. I can't, I can't really waste a lot of time sort of, meandering and finding my place within a scene. So writing the book, I had an outline, and I ended up being very practical and methodical about it, because this is actually the first book I've written with multiple POVs, because I wanted to sort of model it on thrillers like like Lucy Foley, right, where you do have like sort of multiple POVs telling the story, and you don't really know who everyone has sort of, ulterior motives, and you don't really know, who is responsible for the crime. And the story just sort of unfolds within these, multiple POVs. And so what I ended up doing was putting the outline within a spreadsheet, with my scenes, across the bottom, and like the characters along the top. And so I just had this timeline of events. And each cell, I just sort of made notes on, what each character is doing at that moment, even if they're off page. What are they doing? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? And that's how I handled it.
Oh my goodness. I don't think many people have told us that they used a spreadsheet for planning their
I know
novel.
it's so banal, but at the same time, it was like so useful. It was so useful.
And I mean, did you find that there were logistical challenges from writing from these different POVs? And did that take, I suppose, an extra strain on your mental capacity to, let's say, be in Jen mode as opposed to Freddy, which are very different modalities?
I mean, if anything, I think having that spreadsheet really helped, just because, for each scene, I could see who would be the best point of view to tell the events of that scene. And I think having that, having those scenes sort of sectioned off. Okay, this is a Freddy scene. This is a Jen scene. This is a Carrie scene. I think that sort of helped me sort of, switch between the different heads. Does that make sense? Having that structure there beforehand, it was very helpful.
Yeah, and for people listening who haven't read it and they've heard Freddy, Jen, Carrie, they're probably thinking, wait a minute, these are all iconic horror names. So when did you know during the writing or the planning that you were going to reference so many horror icons? And did the name that you decided to give each character then deliberately kind of inform the personality and some of the decisions that each of those characters made?
I decided early on that they should all have killer names, except for Tiffany. Tiffany's actually, I just needed sort of a generic like 80s cheerleader name, because that's, the kind of character that she is. Although it's been pointed out to me that Tiffany is actually Chucky's girlfriend, which I didn't realize.
Yeah, so you landed on it accidentally then.
Yeah. But I'd say that none of the characters are really like their namesake. The only thing I borrowed was Carrie, right? So Carrie has a very religious mother, so obviously that's a reference to Stephen King's Carrie. But otherwise I didn't. I didn't. They otherwise they weren't like their namesakes. And actually, even in the book, I don't, no one says, hey, isn't it funny how we all have names like these iconic killers? I don't mention that in the book either, just because I thought it would be kind of, I think it would kind of pull people out of the story, right? If they sort of, saw it a bit more from a distance, or if they kind of saw the workings under the hood.
Yeah, I think it's very early on that you reference Carrie has a religious mother. So when that happened in probably the first 10% of the book, I thought, hang on a minute, is this actually Carrie? But then, of course, like as I progressed, it's like, okay, no, these are just commonalities. But yeah, that aspect certainly got me and made me really sit up.
Yeah, but it was kind of useful that way, because because I decided, okay, like Stephen King's Carrie, she should have a very religious mother, but then that, from there, that one little aspect of her backstory really sort of helped bring the character to life and give her all sorts of motivations for, I guess, for what happens later in the book, and just sort of the way she interacts with other people and the way other people see her. So.
And talking about having backstories, I understand that the cabin had an entire backstory, but ultimately you decided to cut it for matters of pacing. So is there anything you can tell us about that? Can we get an exclusive on the cabin's backstory?
Not really. I mean, it was just the idea that it had once belonged to, it once belonged to a local family, the Portnoy family. And actually, in an early draft, I refer to it as the Portnoy cabin, as opposed to the slasher cabin. So I think if you see very early marketing copy for Slasher Summer, I think they still call it the Portnoy cabin. Um, and so the idea was that, it had belonged to a family, but, since the movie was filmed, it attracted all kinds of, looky-loos, and they ended up having to sell the cabin. And I had the idea that maybe one of the characters was actually related to the family who had owned the cabin, and, they could be a suspect, or maybe that could be a motivation for them, dressing up as a slasher and targeting these people at the cabin. But yeah, no, it ended up not going anywhere. So. But maybe I'll save the idea for another day.
I mean, that's the beauty with ideas. They need not be wasted. They can just be recycled and redistributed in other stories. And I wonder too, what did the editorial process look like? How much editorial input was there, and how closely does the finished book, Slasher Summer, resemble what you turned into the publisher?
I think it's pretty close to what I turned into the publisher. I think they, because there are two publishers, the UK and the US. So actually I had two editors working on the book. But they were, they didn't ask for like many really drastic changes. Although my UK editor actually asked for it to be more gory. So I did put in, even more gore. I mean, I think most of their feedback was just sort of that little things, just sort of like bringing some, small elements forward, or maybe putting some small elements back. Light edits just for, clarity, maybe cleaning up some of the language a bit. When I say cleaning up, I mean simplifying. I don't mean like, cleaning up swearing or anything like that. So I think a lot of their edits were, none of their edits were like super deep structural edits. So that was, yeah. So that was nice, because I think with two editors, I was kind of worried, are they going to come back with conflicting opinions as to how this book is going to go? But they ended up being in agreement with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm always interested because it feels like the landscape has shifted in the last 5 years, where there are more writers getting a different publisher for the UK and the US edition. So I'm always intrigued as to how that editorial process just logistically works. So what you're saying is you got two completely different sets of notes, although luckily there was a lot of commonalities. So then did you have to have 3 documents open at the same time? So you've got your original and you're making the changes, and then maybe on the left you've got the US, the right you've got the UK, and then do you have to send each of them, I suppose, the master document with the edits, or are there little differences now between the UK and the US version?
No, there actually aren't. There aren't any differences in the final version, except for, I think at one point, I think in the UK version, someone's wearing trousers, and the US version, someone's wearing pants. So, although I tried very hard to not actually, you'll notice that I think a lot of times, someone's pants will be described as like khakis, just because I was trying to avoid the whole trousers pants thing, because I know, pants in the UK is very different than in the US. But like the word trousers, right, in North America, that's not, it's not very commonly used word. Like people will understand what it is, but it's not something that, people will say every day. Like no one in Canada or the US says, "Oh, I went to the store and I bought some trousers," right? They say, "I bought some jeans, I bought some pants." So that is actually the only difference. But the editorial process, rewinding a little bit. So my UK editor actually looked at it first. So she gave it a pass. And then I think she and the American editor, I think they conferred, and then he added some more edits to the document. And so I addressed those too. But I think like a lot went on behind the scenes. Like the two editors talked to each other, and so I think in that way I was very lucky that there was very good communication between them. And so I think them talking together, and they made sure that I had just like one document to work off of and one sort of final set of feedback to address. So that was I think I was very fortunate that way.
Yeah, thank goodness for good communication and working together. And as a British person, I can confirm that if you had decided to keep pants in, then I would have, known, okay, you mean trousers. I wouldn't have thought, oh, okay, she's describing all of the characters' underwear now. So I think, we see enough American fiction and movies, but yeah, I kind of love that you put trousers in the UK edition, and that is the only difference. Now, I wonder too, I mean, your publicist said that there are 27 slasher movies referenced in Slasher Summer, which I don't, I mean, that's very impressive, but I almost felt like there were more. I mean, there are so many little references. And was this something that was also tracked with a spreadsheet? And how did you decide when to pepper in each reference?
Yeah, I wouldn't say all of them are slashers. And it wasn't really, I didn't have a list. I didn't have like things that I wanted to squeeze in. Like I just sort of put things in as they came to me. I think the reason why my publisher has a list, because they actually asked for a list. They actually asked me to make a list of, every movie that I reference, because I think they had the thought that maybe they'd make like a letterboxed a list or something. I mean, it's pretty much like as they came to me, all the different things, slashers, and then other horror movies. I probably referenced Hitchcock a few times because I'm because my long history with Hitchcock. I mean, it really just was at the moment, what does this remind me of? And I put the reference in. So, except for Wolf Creek. Wolf Creek, I just sort of snuck that in there, just because Wolf Creek is like one of the most terrifying movies I've ever seen. Like I slept with the lights on after I watched that movie. So I put in like just like a silly little reference to it. It's like the name of the cannabis that Freddie has been smoking. Just to sort of exercise the trauma of having seen that movie.
So would you say that for you, Wolf Creek is the scariest slasher movie?
I don't know. I think it's hard to make a claim like that just because I don't think I haven't seen, I've watched a lot of slasher movies, especially in preparation for this book. But I don't think I've seen them all. Like I said before, I'm not Stephen Graham Jones. There's probably a lot more that I'm missing. But it was personally like terrifying for me just because it felt so realistic, right? I mean, it is about, someone in the outback preying on travelers. And I think, as a woman, especially as a woman of color, that is like one of my greatest fears is, being targeted, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? With this, sadistic, and being targeted by a sadistic killer that you can't really escape because it's, again, the outback. So really, terrifying movie.
Yeah.
I think later installments, I think that I haven't watched any Wolf Creek movie since, but I think I get the impression that later installments are a bit more campy, but that first one was, I don't know, it just felt very realistic to me. And this is the same reason why I haven't seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Just because, again, it's that same fear of, traveling through like an isolated place and being targeted because you're there.
Yeah, I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the most effective horror movies that does so much when actually technically showing so little. I mean, that's an all-time favorite, and I know that's a film that my co-host Bob would argue is not a slasher movie, and I know it's slasher tangential, whatever it is a very effective and one of the finest movies ever made. But
Yeah, but I
yeah,
still won't watch it because it
I
just
could see from your reaction to
yeah.
Wolf Creek that
Hmm.
maybe watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre would not be a good life choice for
No,
you. So
no, I
yeah.
know that it would. Yeah, I know it would just give me nightmares, not in a good way.
Yeah. And in terms of that 80s VHS slasher vibe, I mean, it really does extend to the cover as well, because the
Mhm.
cover for Slasher Summer, I mean, it is presented as a videotape. I haven't really seen any of the big publishers committing so much to a cover. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I would have expected Shortwave, who you mentioned before, the
Mhm.
publisher of Brian Macaulay, having done, but it's spectacular. How did the cover come about, and was that an element that you had to fight for, or were the publisher all in?
Oh no, it was the publisher's idea. I mean, they told me it's like, oh, we're thinking of doing it as like a retro style movie poster, and I was like, oh my god, that would be so awesome. And then when I saw the initial sketch, like I was actually at the office, and I was like, trying so hard not to scream because it was just like so amazing. Um, so yeah, no, I really lucked out on the cover. And I don't know if you've seen, there's a special Target edition that comes in a slipcase. So the slipcase looks like, it looks like a VHS tape cover, and then inside the actual book itself, the cover looks like a videotape. And it's just, yeah, it was just like I totally lucked out on like the actual book design. It's just, yeah, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I saw there were about, what, 3 to 5 different editions. I must confess, I didn't even know the publishers specifically put out this is the Target edition, or
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I mean, like I'd heard about some maybe some bookstores or bookstore chains getting special editions. Maybe they get sprayed edges, but yeah, like I didn't realize that Target, and Target or like Walmart, there's also a Walmart edition that has a bookmark in the back. It's like I had no idea that Target and Walmart actually did these special editions for books, but yeah, they have. It's yeah, it's pretty amazing. So,
and I haven't actually asked you, but what is your favorite slasher?
favorite slasher movie.
Mm.
So my favorite one is The Final Girls, from 2015, with Taissa Farmiga and Malin Ackerman. Have you seen it?
I haven't. No, I'm familiar with it, but I
It's
haven't.
a lesser known one, um, and I just love it so much because it is like it's self aware, very funny. So Taissa Farmiga plays she plays like a teenage girl whose mother, played by Malin Ackerman, was a scream queen. She starred in a summer camp slasher movie back in the day, and she'd since passed away. And then Taissa Farmiga's character and her friends, they somehow end up in the world of this movie, this slasher movie, and it's just done really well. Like they're in the world of the movie, and there's like text, like three-dimensional text just sitting on the ground that they had to step over because it's like a caption that was like on screen in the movie itself. And it's just like it's really really funny, but at the same time it's really really touching because she meets her mother, her deceased mother, playing who's the character in the movie. And so of course she doesn't want her mom to die in the movie because she's fated to do so because it's a slasher. And so it's just it's just like really fun, but at the same time it's got a lot of heart. So that and it's not very gory at all. I think that's one of a lot of the comments on IMDb, I think, and on Shudder, it's like people complain that it's not very gory, but I really like that because I actually don't like gore. So.
Yeah, no, I'll have to finally, over a decade later, get round to watching it then, especially with that endorsement. And it sounds like it's a lot smarter than a lot of, more, I suppose, generic slashers. It sounds very self-aware. Well, what is one thing that you learned about writing and one thing that you learned about yourself through writing Slasher Summer?
Oh, one thing I learned about writing. I guess one thing I learned about writing while writing this book is that, I told you already about my spreadsheet. I learned that I shouldn't be afraid to be so methodical and intentional and focus on craft and structure because, when I was younger, I'd read, writing craft books and I'd be like, oh, I know all that instinctively. I think I was very, maybe a bit arrogant as a writer. And I just kind of assumed that I knew how to do things, out of instinct. And so I think writing this book and coming up with, this method of working on it with, the spreadsheet and my outline and all that, I think it taught me that, I can use these very dry and banal and prosaic tools to write this book. But it doesn't affect the quality of the book. It helps the quality of the book, and it doesn't make the book itself dry and banal. And so I think it's, the lesson I learned is that, it's okay. It's okay to focus on craft. It's okay to be analytical. You don't have to be all right brain all the time. And then the second question, which I've forgotten already.
Well, something that you learned about yourself through writing Slasher Summer.
I guess I learned, I suppose I learned just how much I do love slasher movies, despite the rocky start, and, the gore. But just learning that, there is something really wonderful about seeing, more often than not, it's, a female, it's a heroine in the place of the final girl. I think I just didn't know how much I needed to see, a woman or someone, with a marginalized identity in sort of the position of hero. I mean, not just, being heroic, but it's also, finding inner strength. But, a lot of cases, it's sort of like a coming of rage as well. There's something really cathartic at seeing, a woman, at the end, finally, when there's nothing left to lose, just, sort of tapping into those sort of primal survival instincts and letting herself be angry and be violent and, fight back. I really love the later Scream movies, the ones with Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera, because those are almost like coming of rage movies, right? It's kind of a spoiler, but at the end, the girls, they fight back their attacker, and she's stabbing, the current ghost-faced killer, and that she's enjoying it, right? That it really is, that's almost sort of a twist on, I suppose, the old school sort of final girl, when it was, the girl next door, Laurie Strode, just sort of forced into this position and just sort of reacting. But in this case, in those two Scream movies, you have these girls who are, I think, a lot more proactive, and they have a lot more agency, and it isn't just sort of knee-jerk survival. And it's very, it's very empowering to watch things like that.
Yeah, I think coming of rage might be your subgenre. I feel there is a theme throughout your work, and I certainly anticipate that will also be the case with One of Us Is Already Dead.
Possibly.
And is there much that you can say about that project? I know that you've said before it's Blair Witch Project inspired.
Yeah, so it's inspired by the Blair Witch Project, but as much as it's inspired by the movie, but it's also inspired by the fact that Heather Donahue, who starred in it, the fact that she quit Hollywood, right? I mean, the inspiration for the book came when many years ago I was flipping through a magazine and I saw a little sidebar saying that Heather Donahue had written a memoir about quitting Hollywood and starting a cannabis farm of all things, and that really surprised me because I thought that movie was such a huge hit and she was so good in it, but yeah, she just sort of disappeared from Hollywood, and so. Of course, my writer brain was like, well, what if the events of that movie were actually real? And that's why she got out of acting. So that was the seed for the origin of One of Us Is Already Dead. I also think of it as it's my midlife crisis horror novel. Again, I wrote it during the pandemic. I'm in my 40s, right? And my age never really bothered me before, but during the pandemic, when we were all in lockdown, I just sort of started getting this feeling of, this is time that I'm never going to get back, right? So that sort of feeling combined with, the idea of, a found footage movie in which things, not everything that happened on film was fictional, that sort of got mashed together, and, that became that book.
And I wonder, in terms of the presentation of the book, does it mimic a found footage film in the way that Slasher Summer kind of mimics a slasher film? Is this an area of concern now where you're almost writing the literary version of these film subgenres?
Yeah, so the novel itself is actually not... it revolves around a found footage movie, but it's not found footage style. There's sort of, flashbacks to what happens during the filming of that film. And then there's sort of there's a current present day timeline, but it's not, it's not like a found footage style book, like, episode 13 or October Film Hunt, right? It is still very much sort of a traditional narrative.
And I wonder too, as we're talking a lot about movie references and movie structures, do you write for the screen? Do you have aspirations to write for the screen? Because it feels like it would be a good match.
I've thought about, like, I would love to learn screenwriting. I just simply don't have the time right now. And I actually did try ages ago, my YA novel, Summerwood Winterwood. I actually tried writing a graphic novel script for the first half of that book for Summerwood. And that was just like a really interesting exercise because I think it was a lot like writing for the screen, and you realize like how much you can't rely on interiority. Like, it was a really interesting exercise in how everything really has to be shown, and and you can't really. It's much harder to get inside a character's head, and so I think writing for the screen. Yeah, like I said, it's something that I would love to do. It sounds like it would be like a really great challenge, but at the moment, I just don't have time.
Yeah, time is the enemy of a lot of us. We have far more creative aspirations and ideas than we do time. But goodness, I mean, you're maximizing your time. And not just with writing, but also with food preparation. Again, another interesting thing I found on your website.
Oh man, yeah, I'm the queen of food prep, I suppose.
Is that something you're still continuing to do to this day? If we were to look inside your freezer, which I'm not saying we should do, it's not that type of podcast, but do you have different pieces of Tupperware labeled with different meals?
Yeah, I still have lots and lots of containers in there. I did stop making my own pasta sauce though, because again, I just ran out of time, and so yeah, I do buy store bought now. But yeah, it's still, I do still do a lot of batch cooking, throw it in containers and put it in the freezer because again, like I don't have a lot of time. It's just a lot easier to assemble a meal than go through a great deal of effort to make something that's incredibly complex.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I find when I'm cooking, I at least listen to an audiobook or podcast. So it's like, well, the time is not just being wasted on cooking a meal. I mean, even though it's a delicious meal, it still feels a little bit like dead time if I'm just doing that. So I try to maximize it by combining it with something else.
Yeah, I do listen to a lot of audiobooks that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what is the latest audiobook that you've listened to?
Oh man. I'm drawing a blank here, but I think this probably isn't the latest one, but this is the one that I think had the most impact on me. It's the diary of a provincial lady by E.M. Delafield, I think. It's from the 1930s. Last month in June, I was just so busy with, I guess, finishing up a draft, plus, all the Slasher Summer promo, that I kept starting a lot of books, but then abandoning them. Not because they were bad, but just because like my brain just couldn't process them. But I had the audiobook from the library for The Diary of a Provincial Lady. And that was really just what I needed, right? Because it was written in the 1930s, and it's just sort of that very sort of English diary style, right? Like Bridget Jones' diary. From the point of view of, I guess, a lady, excuse me, in the 1930s who like lives in the country, and it's just like her day-to-day life, her interactions with people. Later on, she becomes an author. I think it was semi-autobiographical. Apparently, installments of it were published in like a women's magazine at the time. And it's just very drawl. It's just very, I wouldn't say laugh out loud funny, but it's just, very dry, very witty. Like I said, that English diary style. And it's exactly what I needed. It was just, very low stakes, very cozy. And I enjoyed it quite a lot. At the same time, I also kind of absorbed that format because I think eventually I would like to write a book that has like a found footage feel that, uses a diary. So it was also, research that way as well.
Yeah, no, I think everything we read in a sense is research, whether directly or indirectly, whether telling us something we want to do or showing us something we absolutely don't want to do.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, you never know when something will be an inspiration. Like, I started this book thinking, okay, it's just going to be a little distraction. And then later it was like, oh, I could actually sort of, use this voice or borrow this format for something I write in the future.
And you said about finishing the second book for Orbit. So is that your latest project then? So does that mean you're, I guess, 2 books ahead from what is forthcoming and what has been published?
I guess that would be 1 book ahead because One of Us is already dead. It is pretty much done. Like it's been finalized. So I think we're just waiting for the pub date. So this is, I guess, the second book I have in my contract. And so, I mean, I guess we'll see how it goes. I don't know. I don't want to tell you too much about it just because, my editor has seen, like, he's seen a synopsis and the pitch for it. But like, I have no idea if he's going to like absolutely hate it. It's going to come back and I'll have to make a lot of changes or write something completely new. But that's, that I think should be my next book that's coming up.
Well, I'm intrigued to see what you've done with it, and I'm very intrigued about One of Us is Already Dead as well, which is an amazing title. So I wonder, what is the best and what is the worst writing advice that you have ever been given?
I'd say that the best and worst advice I've ever received is actually the same advice. It's the old, from Stephen King's on writing, write 500 words a day, right? 500 words a day. And then, after a certain number of days, you'll have a novel. That's all you need. which is really great advice. And I mean, that's something that I do follow. I usually, when I'm drafting, I do write 500 words a day because I can usually do that in an hour. And usually that's as much. I usually have at least an hour a day to focus on writing. But at the same time, it's also bad advice because, it kind of implies that, you have to be productive. You have to be writing every single day, or else, what is your worth as a writer if you can't do this every day? So some years ago, when my son was about 3 or 4 years old, he would not stay asleep in his bed. And you've got like a little one now, so you understand what it's like, right? And so I was so sleep deprived every single day. I had my commute time to the office on the subway. That was supposed to be my writing time. I just ended up falling asleep instead. And I was really quite anxious about that because it's like, I got to write my 500 words a day. And so, I was just like, very depressed and very anxious about this because I couldn't write because I was, sleep deprived. And it actually wasn't until sometime later, I was talking to David Nichol, who's another fantastic Canadian horror writer who wrote, The Geisters and Utopia. I was telling him about how, I was, pretty bummed because I couldn't get in my, daily word count. And he was the one who pointed out to me that, it's usually privileged white men who give this advice that, you have to write every single day because, of course Stephen King can say this because, he had his wife to look after his kids, right? He didn't have the sort of, everyday responsibilities that a lot of us has had. And so I think that was very freeing for me. So in that way, the 500 words a day was, it's good advice, but also really bad advice. It's advice you have to take with a grain of salt. It's something that, it's great to be able to squeeze in writing when you can, but, if you can't, don't stress out about it because, we don't all have, partners to help with the family. We don't all have stable home situations. We don't all have, a secure, safe, and stable lifestyle that lets us, have this habit every day. And so, so like I said, same advice, but it's both good and bad.
Yeah, there's a discussion at the moment on social media where people are arguing about how much a full-time author should write a year, like how many books they should write. And people seem to be going back and forth. They're very opinionated and adamant in their opinion, as is the nature of social media. But really, I just think, write what you can.
Yeah.
That's it. It's like don't put a number on it. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. Maybe even don't compare yourself to yourself, because your situation this year could be radically different from the previous year. And just be beyond everything, enjoy writing, write the story that you want. But it's the moment, I've found at least, when we get caught up in other related to but not writing itself elements that we lose track of the writing. And if we're worrying about how often we're doing it, if we're getting into marketing or selling mode at the point of creative mode, well, that's the death to creativity in itself.
Yeah.
And there's...
And I think people just go so caught up in the rules, right?
Yeah.
They think that they have to meet a certain like batch of criteria, or else you can't call yourself a real writer. And then I think also people are very, they're very biased. It's like, well, I can write 500 words a day, so you should be able to write 500 words a day too. And yeah, I should add like a huge caveat here that the only reason why I can write, 500 words a day is that, I do have a day job. My situation is, pretty safe and secure. I'm lucky enough and I'm privileged enough that I can do this. There are things I don't have to worry about, my housing or, my grocery needs, that kind of thing. I'm extremely lucky that way, but, and I don't have any chronic mental health issues. So, other people, like, you can't compare yourself to me. I'm just extremely fortunate to be in a situation where I can have these habits.
So what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
So I think this kind of, I guess, ties back to, I suppose, the themes of identity and stuff that we've been talking about, with Slasher Summer and I guess my own experience. I would tell her that you don't have to try so hard to be the person that other people think you should be, right? I think when I was younger, I was younger, and I think, part of this might be also a little gendered as well. Part of me thought that, to sort of, exist in the world, I had to be, bright and funny and outgoing. I had to be the popular girl in, the 80s film, all the kind of movies that I grew up with as a kid. And I think trying to behave that way, I probably came off as being like totally awkward, right? So I think I would tell my 18-year-old self that, you can just, turn it down a notch. You can just be yourself. You don't have to smile and giggle so much. You don't have to, be the person that you think you're supposed to be. That would be my advice. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting trying to play, this role, trying to be what you think you should be, how you think you should present yourself to the world. It's very exhausting. It's very tiring.
Yeah, I think it's a lesson that a lot of us learn, and a lot of us learn a lot later than we wish we had learned it. So then on that basis, I mean, when would you say it was that you became or decided to just embrace more who you are and stop pretending or stop trying to please and just be you?
It probably wasn't until I was in my 30s. I think it just sort of hit me that, I was at some, networking event, and I was just talking to people, and I was just like relaxed. I was relaxed. I was talking to people. I was asking questions. I was just being, I think a lot more sincere and, sincere in my curiosity. Like I wasn't saying or doing or, behaving the ways that, I thought, a friendly person, going out to network, I wasn't behaving the way that I thought this kind of person would act. And I was really just sort of taking a step back and, I think just letting sort of my natural curiosity and interest in other people come out.
All right. Well, what is something that frightens you?
Oh, man.
Apart from Freddy Krueger.
I remember Freddy Krueger. So I think something that scares me very much, and, this I explored in Sweetside Motel, is not knowing who to trust, right? Because I think that book really is about, the central fear is, not knowing who to trust, not knowing who's telling the truth. And I think it's just, I don't know, because I'm very bad at reading people. I've always been very bad at it, and I'm 99.9% sure that I'm on the spectrum. So I think that's also a big part of that, that I don't always know when someone's being sincere. And I think that's gotten me into, a lot of bad situations. And so I think that is like sort of one of my primal fears, is that not knowing who to trust, not knowing if what someone is saying to me is honest or not. I mean, I think, one thing that, if you ever want to like totally cross me, if you ever want to be like dead to me, um, is lie to me, right? Like you cannot lie to me, because then, that's it. You're cut off, right? Because, how can I ever trust you again? So I think that is, for me, that's like a really big fear. And that's something that, it's very useful for writing horror, just because, so many characters in horror, so many situations, they tend to be very sinister. You have a lot of characters doubting themselves, especially in, Gothic novels, when you have the sort of the trope of the woman, it's where it's like, is she going mad, or is she actually seeing the truth, right? That's something I think that's, that would be very, very frightening to me if I ever had to be in that situation.
Yeah, you're making me think a lot about trust and who can we ultimately trust, and it's difficult to ever answer that. And when you trust someone, you expose yourself to hurt, you expose yourself to vulnerability, and it's tough because I think I want to trust people, but I also know in trusting people that there could be repercussions, that it's almost easier not to trust.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, that is scarier than any monster under the bed or in the closet, any sort of, physical threat, that often shows up in the horror genre.
Yeah. And I think too, when you've been divorced, as both of us have as well, it completely changes things and changes the way in which you view the world, in which you interact with others, and it makes trusting incredibly difficult. Which is a lovely note as we come towards the end of the podcast, but perhaps on brand for This Is Horror. Well, I wonder, where can our listeners and viewers connect with you?
So I've mentioned my website before. I'm at elainechen.com. That's my website. There are also links to, I think, on social media. I'm mostly on Instagram and Blue Sky. I also have like a TikTok account, but I don't check it very often. I just sort of, if I have a video that I post to Instagram, I'll put on TikTok. But TikTok and Instagram, I am chaotic responsible. And Blue Sky, I'm just elainechen.com.
Yeah, in terms of social media and in terms of putting up videos and putting up posts, I mean, how do you find that balance, and how do you find kind of what to put up? Because I find there's almost this demand now for us, particularly to put up video content, but I never want to put up anything that feels inauthentic or forced. And that's why 99% of the video content will just be clips from This Is Horror podcast, because at least it's like, well, this is real, this is not putting on a front.
Yeah, that is actually something that I think I told the marketing and publicity team for Slasher Summer right away, is that I don't do videos. Like I'll make unboxing videos. I might do the occasional video, but I will not make videos with my face in them, in which I'm talking to the camera, just because it just feels, for me, it just feels very fake, like talking to someone. Like I know I would probably come across as being like incredibly like awkward and inauthentic. Plus I never know what my face is doing. That being said, like I do actually have a video on there showing, on Instagram, showing, the different editions of my book, just because it just seems like the most appropriate and like quickest way to actually share what the different editions are like. But yeah, like I'm not out there making like, comedy sketches and things like that other writers seem to do, pumping out content. But yeah, as to like knowing what to post, it's very tricky. I think I'm mostly following other authors and seeing what they're doing, right? And just sort of seeing what I can, Is there something that, I can borrow? Is there, a lot of times there'll be like visual memes going around, is that something that, I can also quickly put together in Canva. But it is time consuming, because sometimes you feel like you need to post about something like, oh, my book is coming out in 1 week. Okay, I need to come up with this graphic. And then next thing you know, that's like a couple hours taken out of your day, not just putting together the graphic, but writing the post and writing the alt text for the image, and then actually putting it out there. It is very time consuming. So I'm trying to sort of pick and choose what I do.
Yeah, I think as well, part of the time-consuming nature is just how there's not one dominant social media platform. So half the time it's cross-posting to every single platform. And then if the platform has hashtags as well, it's like, well, now I've got to slightly alter that as well. I probably shouldn't use Writers of Instagram on TikTok. So I think it comes back to what we've been saying throughout, though, and being authentic. And I couldn't do a high energy video like Clay McLeod Chapman, but he could because he's Clay McLeod Chapman, and that is authentically him. But I don't know, it's a personality thing, but I think as well, huge generalization, but I think like British and Canadian people are a little bit less out there than like the American bombastic, larger than life videos. Maybe the American accent helps as well. I'm not sure, but yeah, it would feel.
Probably, British Canadian, and plus, Chinese Canadian. It's like we're very reserved. We're taught to not talk about ourselves and not make a big fuss. I think that's maybe the part of it. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for spending the majority of your evening chatting with me.
You're very welcome. This has been great. Like I said, like I've listened to the podcast and I am a fan. So this is like this is a writerly bucket moment for me to actually be on the podcast. So this is really awesome.
No, I really appreciate this, and you've written a great book in Slasher Summer, and I want to do this again for one of us is already dead, so that hopefully we can make that happen. But before we go, or as we go, do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, any final thoughts? No. So maybe one thing that I can say, because people have been asking me if there's going to be a sequel to Slasher Summer. First of all, I don't know. That's still kind of up in the air. But I just wanted to sort of give a little teaser that if I were to write a sequel, because I do have ideas for a sequel, I would bring back a character that people think is dead. So that's my little sort of ending teaser.
That is the bombshell to go out on. Thank you very much again.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening to E.L. Chen on This Is Horror. Join me again next time when I will be chatting with Richard Jerram about his brand new book, The Makoto Murders. Now, if you would like to support the podcast and get to hear every episode ahead of the crowd, please do become a patron at patreon.com/thisishorror. Not only will you get early bird access to each episode, but you'll be able to submit questions to each and every guest, including Richard Jerram. So, once again, to be a This Is Horror podcast patron, it's patreon.com/thisishorror. Okay, before I wrap up, a quick advert break.
From the host of This Is Horror podcast comes a dark thriller of obsession, paranoia, and voyeurism. After relocating to a small coastal town, Brian discovers a hole that gazes into his neighbor's bedroom. Every night she dances and he peeps. Same song, same time, same wild and mesmerizing dance. But soon Brian suspects he's not the only one watching, and she's not the only one being watched. They're watching is The Wicker Man meets Body Double with a splash of Suspiria. They're Watching by Michael David Wilson and Bob Pastorella is available from thisishorror.co.uk, Amazon, and wherever good books are sold.
House of Bad Memories, the debut novel from Michael David Wilson, is out now via Cemetery Gates Media. Denny just wants to be the world's best dad to his baby daughter, but things get messy when he starts hallucinating his estranged, abusive stepfather Frank. Then Frank winds up dead, and Denny is held hostage by his junkie half-sister, who demands he uncovers the cause of her father's death. Will Denny defeat his demons, or be perpetually tortured for refusing to answer impossible questions? Clay McLeod Chapman says, House of Bad Memories hits so hard, you'll spit teeth out once you're done reading it. House of Bad Memories by Michael David Wilson, available now in paperback, ebook, and audio.
Alright, well, as always, I would like to end with a clip from a previous This Is Horror episode. And today's clip is from episode 665 with Jed Shepard, in which he talks about the best and worst writing advice he ever heard. So, here we go.
I think it was Paul Tremblay when he said, just spend 3 hours a day writing and then go and do the rest of your life stuff. And honestly, that's been really helpful for me because, I used to be the kind of person that would just sit in front of a blank page all day and just absolutely, go crazy trying to write something interesting. But then when I know I only have a short space of time, a small window to write in, it's so free and it just comes out. And the rest of the time you can still think about it and you can, so tomorrow I'm going to put this in. You can still make notes. And then the next day you have like a bunch of notes, you have a bunch of thoughts and you write that in, and it just becomes a lot more organic and easy to kind of write if you set a certain amount of time, I think. So that's been really, really helpful. Oh, and I think that maybe the worst advice, and it wasn't one person in general, but I feel like, especially for screenwriters, some people feel that if you're not using the right software, you're not using Final Draft, then you're not a writer. That's complete tosh. Write on anything. Write in notes. Write it in Word. Write it in Google Docs like we did with Host. Doesn't matter. If the story's good, the story's good. And if someone judges you because you haven't spent 300 quid on some software, then they're not the person you want to be making a movie with. It does look nice in Final Draft format, I will say that, but you don't necessarily need it. So, and just the other general advice that I would say for myself is just be nice to everyone. Like, it's free, and you can do it easy. Just be nice to people, and if you see people doing well, support them. If you see people not doing well, support them, because that could easily be you in either of those situations, and you want people to kind of come around and support you. So just be very supportive to your fellow filmmakers, especially in the UK, because it's really hard. And that's it, really.
And if you want to listen to the full episode with Jed, you can listen to episode 665 of This Is Horror podcast. Or if you want the video version, it is available on YouTube, youtube.com/@thisishorrorpodcast. And if you want other inspirational clips from past episodes, please do follow us on TikTok and Instagram @thisishorrorpodcast. Okay, well that does it for another episode of This Is Horror. So, until next time with Richard Jerem, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.